I want to start with this framework deal between President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. What might the framework of a deal look like, as alluded to by Trump and based on what you've heard?
Of course, we haven't seen the agreement, but of course, we can only speculate. What is in the mandate of Secretary General of NATO to talk about is the security of the Arctic, and that is what has been offered before. If United States has worries about the security of the Arctic, considering the importance of the region, then these issues can be addressed via NATO.
Is Europe comfortable with Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, negotiating on Denmark's behalf?
Security issues can be, of course, discussed in NATO, whether it's, a new mission, whether it's some kind of activity from the NATO side. But, of course, also all the NATO members need to agree. But when it comes to territorial integrity, sovereignty of Greenland or Denmark, when it comes to critical raw materials, then, of course, these are issues that Denmark and Greenland should discuss about.
Right. The reporting shows right now that NATO will beef up security in the region to prevent encroachment by Russia or China. The U.S. would get mining rights and the ability to station missiles there. What is your confidence, Kaja, that this is enough for President Trump, that he won't press further for sovereignty of Greenland?
One thing we have learned over this year is that we have to be prepared for the unpredictability. So nothing is really clear, even if there are agreements made. So I think this is what we have learned and what we need to also prepare. We need to have plans ready for different scenarios, and that is what we are working on. And of course, what I also want to stress is that, when there are spats like this going on between allies, then, of course, our adversaries are really enjoying the show of it.
From the Europeans' perspective, and I realize this might be a very basic question, why is it critical keeping Greenland under Danish sovereignty as opposed to the U.S.?
Because the Greenlandic people, have said that they want to be with the European Union, they want to be with Denmark. And that's why, the future of Greenland is up to the Greenlanders to decide. And that's why we are, of course, supporting the territorial integrity, sovereignty, but also the right for the Greenlandic people to choose.
Now, in response to President Trump's threats to take Greenland, Europe decided to freeze its trade deal with the U.S. Could you give us some color into that status of that trade deal? Is it completely dead in the water? Is it on pause? What would it take for Europe to take it up again, to move forward on it?
Last 2 days I've spent in the European Parliament, and really where are all the members elected in all the member states of Europe, and really saying and voicing their concerns about this. The trade deal that was done in the summer, the argument behind it was that at least, our companies need security, need some kind of stability. Any deal is better than no deal, and this unpredictability. What we have seen, of course, now over the last few days is that this stability might not be there. And that's why the European Parliament that is representing the European nations is also voicing concerns and has stopped this process, because what kind of guarantees there are really from this deal?
Of course, we know also Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, ended up attending Davos because he flew there to have a meeting with President Trump. And while there, he has accused European allies of failing to halt Russia's actions and lacking the will to act as a real global power. What are the next steps for Ukraine, as most of the attention seems to be focused on Greenland right now?
Well, Well, exactly. I mean, the real issue is Ukraine right now. And that's why, any kind of disagreements that we have between allies, our adversaries like Russia and China are really enjoying this show. And that's why we really need to focus on what is the real risk right now. If, United States is worried about security and worried about what Russia might do, then we should be united in also response to Russia in Ukraine. What we have seen a diplomatic push for peace. We have seen concessions from Ukrainian side. What we haven't seen is Russia to make any moves or showing any signs of wanting peace. The opposite. They have increased their attacks against the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. So we really need to put the focus where it should be.
I also want to ask you about India and Europe, because we know that Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, has spent his time at Davos talking about how middle powers need to do more, form their own alliances. And we've seen how EU and India are strengthening ties. You announced the signing of a new security and defense partnership this week. Talk a little bit about how that paves the way for a trade deal as well. What are the guiding principles here for Europe to get a trade deal signed in a timely manner?
While, others are really taking down the bridges, then we are trying to build bridges with our partners all across the world. And we see the appetite also all across the world to build partnerships with the European Union, whether it's, Mercosur, whether it's India, whether these are other countries, to really diversify the trade portfolios that we have in order to be also stronger and more independent. That is why we are also discussing the free trade agreement with India. We are also discussing the security and defense partnership with India. How can we build, these partnerships in order to really step up to the threats that we have?
I hate to bring it back to President Trump, but he spent a good chunk of yesterday's speech in Davos insulting Europe, casting the continent as weak, as utterly dependent on the U.S., whether we're talking about security or economics, the markets. Is there reflection in Europe on that kind of assessment from the president?
It is clear that the transatlantic relationship is not the same as it was a year ago, but Europe is not willing to junk 80 years of good relations for disagreements. At the same time, we need to be also more self-confident in our actions. And again, we are strong when we are united and acting in a unified manner, whether it's a question of economic security, when we are attacked, or when it's a question about the real security and defense that we are building. So yes, a lot of criticism, and Europe as a continent has been also very self-critical, and that also is a basis for the progress.